All right, so implementing a brand new forest. Once in a while, we come across an opportunity to start over. And so when you are implementing a new forest, you're going to be in a situation that allows you to rebrand the entity. So if you are Contoso, which is a sample domain that Microsoft often uses within their documentation, and you feel that you should now be Contoso AB, here's your chance to implement a new forest and get there. So let's talk about the strategy behind a new forest plan. We have a couple of engineers here that need to work together. So I have Carrie Pepper. She's an information technology architect, and I have also Jim Ion. He is also an information technology architect, and they're both on the team, and they're getting ready to architect their Active Directory forest. So, of course, we don't want to just start installing stuff here and there. We want to make sure we have a really great plan in place. So let's consider a few things. So one, the Active Directory architect and project manager are responsible for completing a forest plan for their organization. That plan should contain a list of forests to be designed for the organization by defining the forest owner and the scope of the forest. You know, another example that I hadn't mentioned previously was sometimes organizations are not using Microsoft Active Directory, and that's relatively common in some industries in the field. But now it's time to do that. They're finding that Microsoft integration of certain products works better with Microsoft Active Directory. So a forest plan could actually relate even to migrating off of a different authentication platform altogether. Now, as you develop a forest plan, it's important to determine the number of forests for your organization. So there will always be a highest level container in Active Directory. As a first step in the design process, the Active Directory architect and project manager must determine how many forests the organization requires. Because it is the simplest model to administer, you should strive for a single forest design for your organization. Now, there are some exceptions to that, and not every organization can choose that model, especially larger organizations with lots of divisions, but it is one thing to seriously consider. So let's talk a little bit more about shared forest attributes. These would exist even if you had a single forest, but especially when you have multiple forests, there are some attributes that would be shared across each Active Directory forest. So first we have the schema. Now the Active Directory schema contains information about every object class and all of the attributes for every object class that can be stored in a forest. So what does this mean? Well, every user account is an example of a user class that's defined by the schema. And so the schema description is stored in a portion of the Active Directory database that replicates to every domain controller in the forest. So that's your schema. Also shared is the configuration data. So what is this, right? Well, it's an Active Directory deployment that's described by a set of configuration objects that contain data defining infrastructure and topology elements such as domains and sites and site links. Now, the configuration data is also stored in a portion of the Active Directory database that replicates to every domain controller. So that will be carried across all of them. Also, the global catalog of searchable directory objects. The global catalog role really offers the opportunity for certain types of lookups to occur more quickly. Now, administrators can designate domain controllers to hold, in addition to the replicas of the domain data, a partial copy of each object in the forest. So that data is kept in a portion of the directory database called the global catalog. The global catalog concept allows for fast and efficient object searches that span the entire forest. Like I said, there are certain situations where it really improves the performance. Now, every global catalog domain controller in a forest, regardless of the domain to which it belongs, holds an identical copy of the global catalog. So some very, very important stuff that's shared across your forest. And then finally, we have trust relationships between all of the domains in the forest. By default, Active Directory will automatically create transitive two-way trust relationships between all of the domains in a given forest. Any member computer can recognize and authorize access to any user or group from any domain in the forest. So lots of shared attributes to consider as you're designing what your new forest might look like. Now here's a breakdown of the domain design tasks that you should make sure occur before doing any type of setup of a new forest. So number 1, create a domain design. And that's a breakdown of these tasks on the right. So 1, you're designing the forest root domain. Then you're going to divide organizations into regions according to guidelines. Then for each region, you'll specify whether to create a new domain or upgrade an existing domain. You'll then specify how to consolidate all remaining Windows NT MUDs in the region, and then specify how to consolidate all remaining Windows NT resource domains in the region. Now, these last 2 steps may not apply if you've upgraded beyond the Windows NT at this point, which I would suspect, but still notable. Once the domain design is complete, then on the left here, we'll make sure we have a DNS design that supports our domain. You'll also want to create an organizational unit design. You'll also create a site topology for replication, and then you will be complete. Now, what does an Active Directory forest look like structurally on paper? Here you go. So I mentioned Microsoft often uses their Contoso.com example. And so in this case, it's not a single forest. Well, let me take that back. It is a single forest, but it has multiple subdomains. And so when I say it's not a single forest, I mean there's not one domain. So we have here the Contoso.com with subdomains of Contoso Accounting, Contoso Corp, and Contoso Sales. So for your organization, you're going to have to take a look at what culturally makes sense. Now, ideally, you would just want to move forward with the single domain, like we see here up at the top with the Contoso.com, without the subdomains. But again, you have to listen to the needs of the organization as it relates to site topology, locational structure. Is accounting big enough that it warrants its own organizational units so you can set up group policy or different printers? You might want accounting to have their own print servers. And so those are the types of considerations you should be thinking about as you put together your Active Directory forest.